Okay, so thank you for joining us. And today we have a special guest who is Zeus Sequiera. Zeus is a senior manager of strategic sourcing at a very large financial institution in Toronto in Canada. Zeus, if you want to share that, I'll let you afterwards. But for now, that's all I'll say about that. He's also an experienced global procurement leader who's passionate about influencing sourcing decisions, driving supplier consolidation, cost savings, and cost avoidance. He has 9 years of progressive experience in procurement. He holds a bachelor's degree in computer engineering, which is also incredibly professional or impressive, and an MBA from the University of Toronto. Zeus is also a motivational speaker, which is part of the reason that we've asked him to join us today. So welcome, Zeus.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Thank you.
So before we get started, do you want to tell us a little bit about your path and how you became a motivational speaker?
Yep, I guess it sort of found me, the path that I set myself on. I had certain goals that I wanted to achieve, and I noticed that people were taking notice to some of those achievements. And I think, in fact, one of my earliest speaking engagements was with the Line Connect, and it sort of just spiraled from there. I think, and it's sort of taken on a life of its own. But I'm definitely grateful for the path.
So for people who don't know what Line Connect is, you want to give a short explanation of that?
For sure. I would say it's one of the various mediums that connects students with disability employers. They also have various scholarship programs for students with disabilities. So it's a good program to be a part of, especially if you're a student in North America.
And now I'm assuming because you're connected, I actually know the answer, but I'm assuming because you're connected with Lyme that you have a disability yourself. You have lived experience?
Yes, I have cerebral palsy, so definitely lived experience with a disability.
Okay, great. So what are some of the challenges, Zeus, that you've faced with your disability, and how has that shaped your outlook in life?
So I guess it's twofold. I think there are physical challenges, of course, especially in my younger life when I was sort of gaining my mobility and trying to overcome the disability. But then again, with most visible disabilities, there's also the mental component, right? There's the anxiety and the stress, and sometimes the depression that goes along with it. And the latter normally doesn't get as much notice, but it's something that I've faced.
Thank you. So, can you kind of explain more for us, if it's all right, Zeus, about kind of the nature of your disability, kind of what that's sort of meant for you and the challenges that you've had sort of early in your life, and how it's kind of shaped your outlook on life today?
For sure. So cerebral palsy basically is a condition where the signals from your brain to your muscles are sort of impacted. So the signal that relaxes your muscles isn't like, fully like on or strong enough, and the signals that contract them can be a little bit stronger. So you're left with sort of like a spasmodic movement. Some people impacted more severely than others. I would say luckily, my case wasn't as severe.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that, Zeus. Um, so you're not you grew up in a different country. You actually grew up in India. So can you talk about um kind of what it was like for you growing up in India with all the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, India's come a long way since the time, I was young. That being said, growing up in India and going to a public schooling system in the 90s was challenging. There wasn't a lot of sensitivity or awareness around disabilities, right? So uh, it presented its share of challenges, especially with, other kids growing up around other kids. That being said, though, I think one of the positives or one of the more beautiful aspects of the road that I've been on is I grew up with those kids, and I've seen them like, turn into adults now, and they're just totally different people, very tolerant, very empathetic, and it's amazing the journey people go on. You know someone and you see them in a certain light, but they can surprise you over time. I think, and over time we've all grown a lot, where we all approach people from a place of empathy, especially in Canada, right? So it was tough, but India's come a long way since then.
Zeus, I'm going to just jump in and pick up on that. So you're an immigrant to Canada then. So there's different dimensions of your diversity. There's disability, there's that you're a newcomer. Was English your first language when you came?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so that was, maybe made it easier. Were there any other, so adjustments that you faced or barriers that you faced when you came from India to Canada?
Yeah, and I would say it's funny, even though English is my first language, I would say that there are still, cultural aspects to communication that I needed to pick up on. And I'll tell you, so Canada is it's one of the most polite places in the world, right? So in India, if you're interviewing for a job and you're not a good candidate, they're going to let you know straight to your face how terrible you were. And, the good thing is you're not getting this job, and you move on to the next one. But in Canada, you have the most positive interview experience, and they're like, look, this is your team, this is your desk, this is where you're going to be working, and like a week later they say, we thank you for your interest, but we moved ahead with other candidates. I was like, what do you mean? After that, what was all of that about then? So I think one of the things I learned early on was, I think, what we call the feedback sandwich in Canada, where
yes.
Someone says, okay, this is amazing, but maybe X, Y, and Z, but also this, you were really great. And I've learned to read between the lines. If it's not an absolute yes, it's generally a no. So that was one of the big takeaways for me.
That's a great observation. Now, you pursued your university education in computer engineering at the University of Mumbai.
Yes.
And you got your MBA from the University of Toronto Rutman School of Management. What made you follow those pathways?
I mean, I'm just a sucker for punishment, basically. But actually, honestly, my grandfather was an engineer, and he was a huge role model for me. So I think I always wanted to do the engineering degree from a very young age. The MBA was a little bit different. So after my engineering degree, I actually started working as a consultant for a little while. And I think, 4 years in, I realized that I had the potential to be a leader. And I also wanted to work on the business critical problems to an organization, and not so much the tactical stuff that I was working on every day. I wanted to be strategic, and I wanted to be big picture. And I knew the MBA would help bridge that gap, basically, in landing me those management roles.
Okay. What do you think of the value of higher education is for job seekers, particularly if they have disabilities? So we have Elizabeth from our organization on here. She has a master's degree.
Yes.
And it's in what is it?
Museum studies, actually.
Museum studies. And we have Liz on here, and Liz is pursuing her PhD in.
And I'm pursuing my PhD in occupational science, which is just a fancy way of saying human doing and how humans come to do what they do.
And I think sometimes, Zeus, that the assumption is made that people, at least when I talk with employers sometimes, the assumption is that people with disabilities don't have a further education, or they're always going to have entry-level jobs. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, and I guess the general comment is, I wouldn't count anyone out, despite what their background or adversity is in life. In general, I would say, whether you have a disability or not, people are going to make all sorts of assumptions about you. Some of them, they may find valid. Some of them may be completely out there. That's why I always say, right, when you set out to do something, look internally for validation and not externally. The reason I would say education is important is, in addition to, the knowledge it gives you, for me, the biggest thing it gave me was the network. So being a newcomer to Canada, doing the Rotman MBA program immediately gave me a network of 350 other students, along with the professors, along with, you know, the 350 seniors and the people coming in, you know, into the first year when I was the second year, right? So that network to me is you know, I can't describe how valuable it is. It's what helped me land the BMO job. It's what helped me land the job at RBC as well. So I would say that, you know, the network is a huge factor, but also the knowledge, basically.
My question is around, you think that sometimes we tend as people with disabilities maybe to get education because we're not getting that work experience, and how can we leverage that as experience? So maybe somebody spent 5 or 10 years in school, how can they leverage that education as work experience?
That's a really good question. And, you know, I would say the way I did it was I picked classes or, you know, credits in my MBA program that made up for my lack of experience, right? So because I didn't have those components in my existing work experience. So I'd say, you know, especially if you pick a program that allows you to design your educational experience, and most programs do that in the final years. I would say, you know, pick up the courses that you know, help complement your existing experience, but more importantly, you know, leverage the internship programs that you have in your organization and in your university. And if they don't have an internship program, sometimes the professors are very connected within the industry. You know, I think I've got a lot of job interviews set up through professors at Rotman. So you can use that academic network as well, basically, as leverage.
That's great advice. I think a lot of the times it's knowing how to translate our skills that we learned in school as transferable skills that we can use in the workplace.
Exactly.
And you can put an internship on or a co-op experience on your resume as work experience. So
Exactly.
not to be made light of at all. Zeus, did you do any co-ops or internships with either your undergraduate or your master's degrees?
So not with the undergraduate degree, with my master's, I did do an internship. I also joined like a bunch of clubs. I joined too many clubs actually. Like, you know, I didn't have time for most of them. But that being said, you know, if most people are more organized with their time than I am, so I would say, you know, join as many clubs as you can, and really give yourself to the programs that the clubs have. You know, because it I think that's where the real learning happens. Usually, those student clubs are led by seniors who've been there and done that. So it really complements the education you get in the classroom.
Zeus, I'm wondering if you can share, and this is kind of a personal question, but Zeus is kind of famous because he's been on global news and he's been with CBC kind of sharing his story before. But something just that struck me in learning about your story, you actually went in and you had surgery when you were 14 years old to kind of to straighten or allow you to stand upright, and just how your experience with the surgery and the physiotherapy you had afterwards really kind of shaped your outlook on how to tackle challenges in life and gave you perseverance. And I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit about that, because that was such an inspiring story. I really enjoyed hearing about that.
Oh, thanks so much. That's actually, it's such a good question. It was sort of a defining moment for me. So one, I think, you know, most of my life, I was scared of the surgery because I knew it would be it was classified as supra major. So like one level above major surgery. And it was an intense skeletal and muscular reconstruction. Right. And I think I wasn't like mentally, I didn't comprehend it until I actually had the surgery. It was a lot more intense than I thought it would be, and I had to learn to walk all over again. And I say that because it's not only the surgery that, you know, you're out of commission for 6 months. or 3 months, I can't remember. But because the muscle configuration has changed and the bone structure has changed, your brain actually has to figure out how to use the new body that it has, right? So my balance was zero, and I couldn't even stand. I couldn't in fact, it set me back by at least 2 or 3 years. But I think, once I got a hang of it, once my strength came back to me, there was a marked improvement. I could stand completely upright. I could jog, I could run, I could swim, could do you know really anything I wanted. But I would say the biggest lesson that it taught me, and this has been invaluable, right, is I'm not afraid of starting from scratch anymore. You see, many people in life, it's not every failure that hits you. It's the failure where you've reached, almost the top of the hill and you get knocked all the way back down, right? It's those are the failures that really break you, because you're like, now I have to start all over again. I have to do this all over again. And I think that's what it gave me. I'm almost excited to start from scratch now, because I've faced that at the highest level, right? So and that's what I tell anyone, just because you haven't been through that doesn't mean you can't do it. I think we all have that same innate strength in us. It's just to, when you're in a situation where you realize you've been knocked to the ground and you're starting from scratch, just make that start. Don't delay the start, because all you have to do is take the first step on that journey, and then the rest is it will fall into place, basically.
That just, that inspires me, you saying that, because I think we get so caught up in the challenges of life and the challenges with, having a disability, but also the challenges of just going about and living your life, that we forget that people like you, Zeus, you've had to start from scratch again, and it makes everybody's unique challenges and skills that they have, that you can really tackle anything that you put your mind to. You just have to frame it in the right mindset of, just taking one thing at a time, and it's okay to start from the beginning. So thank you for sharing that. And I think Lisa's been busy in the chat. She's she's shared Zeus's global news article, and I think the CBC article too.
And to
And
that end, Zeus, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do in your spare time?
yes.
For sure. And so, it's so funny. One of the I've always been a fan of boxing, and in 2017 or 2018, I decided to give it a shot, and I initially started training just to get into shape, but then it took on a life of its own, and I started getting really good at it. And then I said, maybe I can actually fight. And at that point, everyone thought I was crazy. There were moments I thought I was crazy, but again, taking it one day at a time, I eventually I got some footage of me sparring, and I showed it to a doctor, one of the medical doctors at Boxing Ontario. And I remember him, all he said is, what, you can fight. And he gave me the medical clearance, and that little note that he wrote, and I'll never forget the note. He said, please, to whomsoever it may concern, and he put Zeus in brackets, God of Thunder, Sequiera has been medically cleared to fight. And I kept that as my fight name, basically. But and then I decided to use that journey to raise money for Holland Blåview, for kids with disabilities, towards the treatment and rehabilitation of kids with disabilities. I had some success in raising a couple $1,000s towards the cause, and then that story started getting traction, and then eventually I was on CBC News and Global News. But the important takeaway here is again, right, not looking at external validation. Whenever you're elevated in life, the forces that are going to try to bring you down, they get equally as strong. As you move up, the forces are going to get equally strong on the negative side. It's like a yin and yang. So in 2020, I got a call from my coach saying, listen, we are, the commission is revoking your license in 2020 because they're not comfortable with the liability anymore, because I think there was just too much scrutiny on my story. But at that point, like the news, I remember people around me being disappointed. It didn't affect me at all because I wasn't looking anymore for anyone else to tell me yes or no. I'd proved that it could be done. I'd raised the money. I'd got my story out there. So it was a great experience overall, I would say.
Yeah, and I know we met. I think you were talking about that story, and when that happened, we had talked, and I said, actually, I think that the fact that you've come to a new country, you've created this career that's successful, is that's the story in itself for most people. I mean, carving out a successful career in your field for anyone with or without a disability can be a challenge, right?
Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest barrier you faced in terms of finding that job and carving it out? And has your disability affected that?
Yeah, I would say luckily the nature of my disability doesn't affect my job because it's a desk job. But that being said, right, the component that I called out earlier, which is having gone through these experiences, it leaves a mark on you. So I do still suffer with anxiety and depression, and that can sometimes really affect my productivity. And especially being at the level that I'm at right now, where where I am senior management, and I'm expected to not just take care of myself but take care of my team. I've definitely faced internal challenges with productivity, and what I would say is, with the nature of my challenge, and it would apply to most challenges, is having an open conversation about it to make sure that you get the support and the help you need. I can't encourage that enough. I've always had open dialogue with all of my managers, saying I'm going to need some time off, like Friday I just need some downtime, or Monday. And there's no shame in it. You're taking care of yourself so that you can give your best to your job. So yeah, I would say open communication
Now,
is.
you've worked at two financial institutions. Have they both been open to, have you disclosed at both, and were both of them open with providing accommodations?
Yep. I would say both of them have. The banks are amazing with regard to providing accommodations, and I would say most multinationals, right? They're sort of under the spotlight with regard to being inclusive, so they don't miss a step. It's a very supportive environment for sure.
And for those of you that are on and aren't familiar with Canadian legislation, so the banks, transportation companies, telecommunications are all under the Employment Equity Act, which is a piece of legislation where they report on their diversity numbers. So they do tend to be leading this field. And I actually think that it's beyond the legislative needs, that they're starting to see the real value of that. So to be fair, thank you for sharing that. Now, on that depression and anxiety piece, any advice for people about that?
Yeah, I would say, understand your cycles, and what your emotional triggers are, what your stress factors are, and take care of yourself accordingly, right? You need to have a game plan in place to give your best to every single day. And more importantly, you're accountable to make sure that you're giving the best of yourself and you're taking care of yourself. And if you're able to do that by exercising, getting 8 hours of sleep, eating healthy, that's great. I know it works for me right now, right? That's why I take care of my body, because it takes care of my mind. But if you're in a situation where you're trying all of the above and it's not working, you need to get help, right? There's no shame in it. Get medical help. You'll feel so much better once you do. So.
Now, I noticed there was no chocolate, Netflix binging, or, having a glass of wine after work on that list.
So once a week, I treat myself, and like once a week, maybe there's a little bit of whiskey, I would say, and a little bit of like a cheat meal. But otherwise, my diet is pretty boring. So.
Fair enough. Now we have a couple questions that have come in, and I'm going to ask everybody. I'll turn it over to Liz, then Elizabeth, to see if they have any questions, and then we'll open it up to the larger group. But we did have some questions come in prior to the session, as well as that are showing up in the chat.
For sure.
So the first question is, what is your advice on strategies to not internalize stigma and societal norms that we hear about people with differing abilities?
For sure. And I would say again, when it comes to your sense of self or your brand, you need to get to a place where either within yourself you're strong enough in who you are and what you want to do, and you don't look externally for validation, right? I'll give you an example. When most people, whether they have a disability or not, they set out to do something, like let's say they want to become a personal trainer, or they want to start an online business. You go around asking like a bunch of friends, do you think it's a good idea, do you think I could do this? And I always, whenever someone asks me that question, what I come back to them is, what if I said no, and what if everyone you asked said no? Like, would you not do it? And if the answer is no, then why? Like, why do you care what I think? Like, I mean, I'm not the best judge in this scenario, right? So I don't look externally for validation. I know there are people who have all sorts of opinions around me, ranging from like, he's an amazing person to I can't stand this guy, and for me, like, I just like focus on what I think of myself and giving the best of myself to people, right? And the reason I say this is just the nature of stigma. You're not going to change it overnight, right? So we are getting better as a society, but we can get there ourselves a lot quicker, you know.
Well, we had a question from somebody in the audience who was asking about have you ever considered, Zeus, finding a coach or a mentor? And I think that leads into a question that I have for you. Have you ever had role models in your life that have kind of helped you along your path? And have you considered to find new coaches or mentors to help you with your boxing or your career?
No, for sure. And I definitely have. Like I said, my grandfather was a huge role model to me. But that being said, because of the path he set me on, um, I've also been cognizant of the fact that when I'm starting to do something new, especially this new role that I have with RBC, uh, if you want to align yourself on the path to success, especially in a new role, the best way to do that is to speak to someone who's done it before, right? So I'm a big proponent for finding mentors. I have sought out mentors in every organization that I've worked with, and over here I would say, when you're doing this, just be careful that you find the mentor that's right for you. Don't just go by designation or title, because you may want to reach out to an SVP or a VP and they may, genuinely want to help. But are they really in a position to give you advice at your level that's going to help you elevate yourself? Or can you get that from someone who's a little bit closer to you in the food chain? So I would say, uh, definitely find mentors, but definitely find the mentor that's right for you. And that's an interview process, like, speak to a few of them, and if they're right for you, they're right for you. If not, you move on, right? So
That's really good to know. Is it generally how you seek out a mentor? Is it like an informational interview that you do? You take somebody, you buy them a coffee and speak with them?
So usually what I do is I get a lay of the land, right? So at BMO, initially, like, I was just during the leadership meetings and the town halls, I was, paying attention to what some of the senior leaders said and what their achievements were, and whether any of them resonated with me. And if some of them resonated with me, then I would, follow up with a coffee chat request. And then, like you said, it would be an informational interview. And if we click, then that's amazing. But if not, then the search continues, so.
And so,
That's
I had a question about,
sure.
just thinking about sometimes people will get a job and then want to move up from that sort of entry level. What advice do you have for people wanting to take that next step and become middle management and improve their skills, especially if they're facing barriers to climbing that glass or climbing that ramp, because the corporate ladder is, I guess, not an inclusive term. So climbing that corporate ramp.
Yeah. And so I would say the people that are able to climb the ladder successfully are the ones that, don't form attachments and are comfortable taking risks. If you want to move up the ladder at your pace, then you can't be tied to a company or a set of people, or anything, and that's been the case with me, right? So I was with Accenture for 4 years, and I wasn't getting where I wanted to be. So I moved. I decided to do my MBA. At BMO, I had really good success where, I went from like a specialist to a manager in around 10 months. But even when I became manager, I knew that this was, my potential was a lot higher. I wanted to be director, and I needed to make senior manager to make director, and it just wasn't happening at BMO, and not for anything else other than there wasn't a spot. Like sometimes there is no place in your current organization. And so I had a healthy chat with management at BMO saying, look, in 2020, I'm going to be looking in the market. And that's when I landed a senior management position at RBC, right? Now that I'm at senior manager, I've put the brakes on a little bit because it didn't give me the satisfaction I thought it would. Like there was maybe like 2 or 3 weeks where I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then it's like, it just feels like another job, right? And that's why I've decided to focus on like more personal goals, family, friends, making more time for the people that care about me. So I would say, look at whether you're unhappy where you are because you're truly unhappy or because you're just not feeling a sense of fulfillment in life. If it's the latter, then you could probably get that from friends and family. But if it's the former, you have to be comfortable taking risks and moving around because it's hard to move up consistently within one company.
It actually is, and I think that's why you need to have a healthy kind of work life balance to get that kind of under control. And it's challenging. I mean, certainly for me, I have that challenge, but I love the work I do, so it doesn't really feel like work. I did have a question for you, Zeus. What drew you to the sport of amateur boxing and wanting to fight in that? What got you motivated with that?
I mean, I would say for some reason, I was always a fan of the sport of boxing. It could have been like the Rocky movies that I saw when I was young. I saw those and I was like, wow, this is amazing. But I guess also just the nature of what I had been through, I was always drawn to like, fighting because I felt like I was a fighter inherently. That's what drew me to it. But there's a lot more to the sport than fighting, though. It's actually a mind game more than a physical game. And the sport actually requires, what I've realized is it can't be a part-time thing. It has to be a full-time job, and I've distanced myself a little bit from it now because it's just not easy to do both. It's not easy to have a full-time corporate job and get in the ring. So
Absolutely. And with COVID right now, that's that's an additional challenge too. So, Zeus, before we turn it over to the audience for additional questions as well, what's kind of your takeaway message that you have for persons with disabilities, job seekers, or persons with disabilities in general? Because you are a fighter and you persevere over challenges. So, what's your overall message?
no, for sure. I would say, especially for professional engagements like this, right? I would focus on two things. One, the importance of staying true to your brand, and two, building and supporting the people in your network, right? Now, I don't want to get into like how to build your brand because I feel like that's a unique journey that everyone must go on their own. But staying true to it is important, right? And the reason I say this is, as most of you all, get into the job market looking for jobs, you're gonna like face probably like 100 different rejections before you get that offer. I know it took me like a year to land my first job in Canada, right? But I knew what I wanted to do, and I wasn't applying to any entry level roles. I wasn't applying to any like middle experience roles. I was applying to management positions, and I think 1 year into it, it's so funny. There were phases where people gave up on me. Like, initially friends were like, listen, it doesn't take that long to get a job. Like, at the 3 month mark, my friends were questioning me. 6 to 8 months in, like, family was questioning me. And then finally, a year in, everyone, including like, my sister was questioning me, saying, why don't you just take what you get? And I was like, I didn't do the MBA to just take an entry level role. If I wanted it, I would have just taken an entry level role, right? So stay true to your brand. be willing to face those rejections because the right job will come to you. And secondly, the importance of your network, right? In my tough times, I've noticed that, pay attention to who your friends really are and who you want, or not who you want them to be. Because I've noticed, especially in times where we're struggling, we tend to look for validation in all the wrong places. So focus on the people that care about you, and feel a sense of gratitude for the people that care about you, because they will like empower your brand and they'll make you feel stronger in your sense of self. Also use that network to get those job opportunities, or at least the interview opportunities. And then finally, when you get the job, don't forget to pass the elevator back down, right? Like, when we say that your network is your net worth, we tend to look at it as self-serving, but we move further if we go together. So if you've landed a job through your network, don't forget to help your network in getting a job when they need it, basically.
I had one question because it comes up a lot in webinars that we've done. How do you, for people that have gaps in their resume or maybe don't have a lot of traditional experience, what advice do you have for people that are trying to break through and get back into the labor market or get into the labor market for the first time?
Yeah. And I would say, like, I would say, look at yourself as a complete package, right? Usually what people do when they're trying to put a resume together is they're trying to paint the generic story, which is, these are all the jobs, this was the number of years I worked in those jobs, and then you wondering how to cover the gaps. But I would say, like, again, it comes back to the brand and focusing on how you tell your story. Because I had a friend like this who, for some reason, was never really successful in holding on to a job long enough. So he had 8 to 9 months in each company, and then like a year somewhere, and then 6 months somewhere else. And he told me, this looks terrible. There's no way I'm going to be able to land something when he moved to Canada. And then that's when I suggested to him, instead of positioning yourself as a person who's worked short stints in multiple companies, why don't you position yourself as an independent consultant who's worked on short-term projects in various locations, so then all of a sudden, those short-term stints looks good because it looks like he can deliver results pretty quickly and move on to the next thing. So I'd say be creative with your resume. There are ways to cover the gaps by positioning yourself differently, I guess.
I'd just like to thank you for coming out to our webinar today. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Zeus very much for just sharing your amazing story, because you inspire me to go out there and try my best every day. And I think you've really kind of opened it up and made other persons with disabilities more courageous about sharing their story and going out and making, a bright light in the world. And
well, thank you. That means a lot, Elizabeth. Thanks so much. And thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome.